Kojiki, the Cave of Heaven. 1. Amaterasu Amakami, the sun goddess, and her second younger brother Tsukuyomi no Mikoto, the moon god, each governed the great sky and the land of night, following their father's command. However, the youngest child, Susanoo no Mikoto, did not obey his father's instructions. No matter how much time passed, he refused to govern the great ocean. Even after growing into a large adult, with a magnificent beard that hung down to his chest, he still cried incessantly like a baby. His cries were so extreme that they had no end and no one could do anything about it. The intensity of his wailing was such that even the green mountains and trees withered away from the loudness, and the waters of the rivers and seas dried up entirely due to the fiery intensity of his cries. At this point, various wicked gods took advantage of the disturbance, making a great noise and causing a commotion. As a result, disasters of all kinds began to occur simultaneously on the earth. When Izanagi no Mikoto, their father, saw this, he was greatly shocked. He immediately called for Susanoo and said, "Why are you crying so uncontrollably and refusing to listen to me?" Susanoo, in a fit of defiance, replied, "I cry because I want to go to our mother's side." Upon hearing this, Izanagi became very angry and said, "A child who behaves so selfishly cannot stay in this land. Go anywhere, but leave." Without a care, the deity said, "Then I will go and ask for leave from my older sister," and as she said this, she began to ascend, heading towards Takamagahara, the high plane of heaven, with great speed. Being a strong, large deity, she stomped with great force, and as she walked, the mountains and rivers shook violently, and the entire world trembled with a deep rumbling. Amaterasu Amakami, startled by the sound, said, "My younger brother is coming up with such force, this cannot be good. He must be coming with the intention of taking my land from me." She immediately began to prepare herself. The goddess quickly combed her hair, tied it into a male-style topknot, and adorned both her arms and waist with beautiful jewels called Yasukani no Magatama. She also placed a large number of arrows, 500 or 1,000, on her back and held a bow in her right hand, prepared to shoot. With great determination, she stood waiting, stamping her feet in anticipation. The ground beneath her feet was so hard that it seemed to crumble like powdered snow, flying up in a great cloud. 2. Soon, Susanoo no Mikoto arrived in the great sky. When the goddess saw his figure, she raised her voice and scolded him immediately. "Deity, what is it that you have come here for?" To this, Susanoo replied, "No, I have not come to do anything bad. When my father saw me crying and asked why I was crying, I told him that I wanted to go to our mother. He became very angry and told me to leave at once, so I came to say farewell to you." However, the goddess did not immediately believe him and said, "Then show me proof that you have no ill intentions." Susanoo answered, "Then let us have children together, and by the children we will prove the purity of our hearts. The child born will reveal whether our hearts are good or bad." 3. The siblings then stood on either side of the Amino Yasukawa River. First, the goddess took Susanoo's 10-fist sword and broke it into 3 parts. She washed them in the well called Amino Mani, grinding them carefully. Then, she blew a mist from her breath, and from that mist, 3 goddesses were born. Next, Susanoo took the decorative Magatama beads from the goddess's left arm and, while making the sound of the beads rattling, washed them in the Amino Mani well. He then ground them carefully and blew mist from his breath, and from that mist, a male god was born. This god was Aminaho no Mikoto. Afterward, Susanoo took the decorative Magatama beads from the goddess's right arm and, just as before, blew mist over them. From that mist, another male god was born. Next, he took the bead decorations from her crown, washed them in the Amino Mani well, and blew mist over them. From that, yet another male god was born. Lastly, he took the bead decorations from the goddess's right and left arms, and after blowing mist over them, 1 male god was born with each breath. In total, 5 male gods were born. Amaterasu Amakami said, "The first 3 goddesses were born from your sword, so they are your children. The other 5 male gods were born from my beads, so they are my children." Susanoo replied, See, I have won. As proof that I have no ill intentions, all my children are calm and gentle goddesses. So, what do you think? Am I still an evil person? He spoke with great pride. Then, filled with this energy, he began to cause trouble. He destroyed the rice field embankments that the goddess had created, filled in the irrigation ditches, and, at the end, defiled the goddess's palace where she ate the first fruits by spreading filth everywhere. The other gods, upon witnessing this, were astonished and went to report to the goddess. However, the goddess did not become angry at all. She said, "What, leave him be. He doesn't do this with any bad intentions. The filth was probably vomited by mistake in a drunken stupor. As for breaking the embankments and ditches, he must have thought it a waste to leave the land in such a state." She said this and, in fact, defended Susano. Encouraged by this, Susano became even more bold. Eventually, he broke through the roof of the weaving house where the women were weaving the goddess's garments, and threw a bloody piece of hide from a speckled horse through the hole. The weavers, startled, fled in panic, and one of them, in her confusion, accidentally struck her abdomen with a shuttle and died. The goddess, unable to bear Susano's extreme violence any longer, retreated to a stone chamber called the Amanowaya, heavenly rock cave, and shut the stone door tightly behind her, secluding herself. Since the goddess was the sun goddess, when she hid herself away, both Takamagahara, the high plane of heaven, and the earthly world below were plunged into complete darkness, and it became a long, endless night with no distinction between day and night. In this darkness, various evil gods took advantage of the situation and began to stir up trouble. As a result, all kinds of calamities broke out across the world at once. The gods of the heavens, greatly troubled by this, gathered at the Yasukawara, a riverbed in the sky, and discussed desperately how to get Amaterasu Amakami to come out of the cave. Then, the wisest of the gods, Omokami, came up with a good idea. At his direction, the gods quickly gathered a great number of chickens and had them crow continuously in front of the cave. On the other hand, from the Yasukawa riverbed, they brought hard rocks and used them as anvils to make a magnificent mirror called the Yata no Kagami and a beautiful ornament of jewels called Yasakani no Magatama. They then brought a sakaki tree from the sacred Mount Kagu and decorated it. On the top branches, they attached Yasakani no Magatama jewels. In the middle, they hung the Yata no Kagami mirror, and on the lower branches, they hung white and blue cloths. One of the gods stood holding this sacred tree in front of the cave, while another god stood nearby reciting prayers. Next, they placed a barrel in front of the cave, and the goddess Ame no Uzum no Mikado, a goddess of mirth, was made to wear a katsura vine as a sash, and leaves of the vine were used as hair ornaments. She then stood on a large wooden tub and began to dance. Ame no Uzum no Mikado danced in a wild, unrestrained way, exposing her chest, stomach, and thighs while stomping her feet, as if possessed by some spirit, twirling around and dancing frantically. Seeing this absurd spectacle, thousands of gods burst into laughter and rolled about in mirth. At that moment, the chickens, too, crowed in unison, kokekako, kokekako, causing such a ruckus that it seemed as though the very heavens might collapse from the noise. Upon hearing this uproar, Amaterasu Amakami was curious about what was happening and, thinking something might be amiss, she cautiously opened the door of the cave just a little and peered out. She then asked Uzum, "What is this? If I remain hidden here, the heavens should be dark, yet you are dancing so joyfully, and the gods are all laughing so heartily. What is the cause of this commotion?" To which Uzum replied, "It is because a far more noble god than you has emerged, and everyone is rejoicing and celebrating." At that moment, one of the gods suddenly held out the sacred sakaki tree with the Yata no Kagami mirror attached to it in front of the great goddess. The mirror reflected Amaterasu's face. Upon seeing the reflection, Amaterasu said, "Who is this?" And, curious to examine it more closely, she stepped slightly outside the door. At that very moment, the mighty god Tajikario no Mikado, who had been hiding near the cave, suddenly took the goddess's hand and pulled her fully outside. Another god stood behind Amaterasu and said, "Please do not return inside from this point onward," and he tied a sacred rope, Shimanawa, across the entrance, sealing it off. Thus, the long night finally ended, and the bright daylight returned to the world. The gods, relieved, gathered and quickly began discussing the fate of Susanoo no Mikoto. As punishment for his outrageous behavior, they decided that Susanoo must surrender his entire estate, have his magnificent beard shaved off, and even his fingernails and toenails removed. He was then cast down to the lower world. At that moment, Susanoo commanded the goddess Oksuheim no Mikoto to prepare food for him. Following his orders, Oksuheim no Mikoto immediately began to prepare food by taking various ingredients from her mouth and nose, cooking them, and offering them to him. Seeing this, Susanoo was enraged and exclaimed, "How dare you offer me food from your own mouth and nose? How disrespectful!" He drew his sword and struck Oksuheim no Mikoto down with a single blow. From her lifeless body, silkworms were born from her head, rice grew from her eyes, and beans appeared from her ears. From her nose, azuki beans sprouted, and from her belly, wheat and soybeans grew. The god Kamu Musubi no Kami, who oversees the creation of life, gathered the seeds from these plants and used them to sow the crops across Japan. Having completed these acts, Susanoo descended to the lower world as commanded.